Thank you, Kasam. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and happy to join this session and take you through a small overview of what Azure Active Directory is. Just to give you an introduction about myself, I've been with Microsoft for about 6, 7 years now. Into different positions, was a part of the CSS, which is the support team, then moved on the field. Now I work as a solution engineer for mission critical customers of Microsoft in MEA. Yeah, so I guess let's get started. So what are we going to study today? The most important thing. And as Kasum rightly mentioned, so Azure Active Directory so not only from 103 or 303, 304 or MS 900 these objectives, but in general also identity is one component which you're going to need in anything in what you're doing, right? So that comes out to be as an important component for your knowledge. Today, what we are going to try and learn is I'm going to give you an overview of a little bit on the history of identity. I'm also going to talk about some Azure Active Directory fundamentals, a little bit introduction, some comparison as to how the traditional identity was and how it is right now. And then I will give you some information about some of the Azure AD features, if time permits. If you are completely new to identity and if you have no background, don't worry because I'm going to cover right from the basics. So I'll start with Active Directory, how it has evolved, and then we'll eventually move on towards Azure Active Directory. So it's pretty much going to cover all the basics. Okay, so let's try to understand Active Directory briefly as to how Active Directory incepted, and I'll take about 5 minutes to try and explain you this. Then we'll move on to Federation Services, and then we'll move on to Azure Active Directory to try and understand how this works. So before I move to Active Directory, I want to start with like the very basics. What are the types of identities do we have right now in the world? Okay, so uh, we all know Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, but what are all the different types of identities Microsoft has? Okay, so I'm not talking about third-party identities. I'm mainly talking about Microsoft and how exactly these have, grown over the years. So just to give you a basic, so Active Directory started in the year 2000. So there was some concept of Active Directory before 2000 as well, but with Windows Server 2000, Microsoft came up with a concept of Active Directory. Now, Microsoft rebranded this in the year 2008 and called it Active Directory Domain Services. So you might have seen a major changes which happened from Active Directory to Active Directory 2000, Active Directory Domain Services in 2008. Now, another thing which happened after that was modern authentication came very prevalent. So Microsoft released Azure Active Directory. This was not originally known as Azure Active Directory. People knew it as Business Productivity. Then it was known as Office 365 AD, but now it is known as Azure Active Directory. This was launched somewhere around 2010. It was preview before that, but now it is launched. It was officially launched in 2010. And the latest addition to this is Azure Active Directory Domain Services, which was launched in 2016, late 2016. This was launched. So these are the list of different types of identities we have in the environment. From this is legacy. Okay, but other than that, we have got pretty much everything which is in existence now and which is basically supported by Microsoft. Of course, we are not no longer supporting Windows 2000 Active Directories anymore. Okay, now talking about that, I would conceptually take you through how the Active Directory model was, what was sites, and how does it transform into Azure Active Directory a little bit, and then we'll try to understand how it makes sense or how it impacts your identity knowledge. Okay, so Microsoft came up with a fundamental of forest, domains, and trees with uh, with Active Directory. So if I have to explain you a little bit, a forest is a place wherein you have a single, wherein you have a single schema in your Active Directory. And hold on one second, let me get rid of this eraser. Okay, perfect. So essentially, a forest is a collection of multiple domains, and that's how it is structured in Active Directory. The reason I'm going to explain you this is because when I move on a little bit on the Azure AD Connect part, you will find that eventually it becomes important. So so essentially, a forest is like wherein there are multiple trees or multiple domains. So if I have to explain you a little bit, let's imagine a let's imagine Microsoft.com. So, so we have got Microsoft.com, and in Microsoft.com, you've got many child organization. Like maybe there's an organization called MS Support dot Microsoft.com, and maybe there is something called sales dot Microsoft.com. So they all belong to one single parent company, but they have different childs. Like Microsoft support.ms.com or sales.ms.com are different childs in this hierarchy. So that's why we call it a single forest environment. Like an environment like this is, we call it a single forest environment. The way I have named it is Microsoft.com or sales.ms.com. If you observe, these all are following a contiguous namespace. By contiguous namespace, what I mean is ms.com is common in all of this. This is the reason why they are, you can say this hierarchy belongs to a single forest. So this example is of a one forest and three domains. So these three are different domains in itself. They've got individual domain controllers, part of the same organization, individual domain controllers, but at the same time, these are individual domains. Now, what Microsoft did recently, you might have observed, is Microsoft acquired LinkedIn. Okay. So when Microsoft acquired LinkedIn, Microsoft has a couple of options, either to create a forest trust between them or to, establish or to merge this domain. Assuming it's a different forest, then we can establish something called as a forest trust. Now, when we establish a forest trust, essentially this is completely different forest for us. So that's how the concept of forest and a domain is. So a forest and domains are essentially a part of the same hierarchy. A different forest, you can assume in simple language, a different domain. Like if I can give you an example of Tata. So Tata has various divisions like Tata Motors, Tata Tea, Tata Steels, XYZ. Essentially, Tata.com could be the parent company, and then there would be various childs like Tata Steel, Tata Tea, many other things which would come in. So that's a little bit on the concept of domains and childs. Okay. Now, to further explain you a little bit more on the availability which these had. So if you see, we have a concept of sites in Active Directory. Okay. So this is called AD sites. Now, AD sites are nothing but different locations. So if your organization is hosted at two different locations, you will potentially create two different Active Directory sites for them. One site could be, let's say this is US, let's call it India. So this is how my structure could be. I will have domain controllers part of the same namespace. Let's imagine this to be ms.com at both the places, but they all belong to the same site. Now, why do we have it? The reason we have it is because of availability. So I have got users in both the sites. I would obviously want local authentication for my sites in those users. So for example, the users from this side, I would want them to get authenticated from here. Users from the US side, I would obviously want them to get authenticated from the local domain controller. This is the reason why the concept of sites came into picture. The concept of sites to some extent is with Azure Active Directory as well. It's just that it is much more highly available. But yes, it is still there and it is still prevalent. Okay. So yeah, that's at the very high level what Active Directory is. So we have got a concept of forest, trees, domains. You can look up for these information. I mean, of course, this is a very in-depth topic, but considering what we are going to talk about in the next few minutes, I just wanted to explain it to you briefly. Okay. Now, let's try to understand what is federation services, because this is also an important component when it comes to authentication of your Azure Active Directory. A lot of times this is used as the primary form of authentication as well, which we are going to discuss in the next few slides. So federation services. So first of all, let's try to understand why federation services came into existence. What was the need? Was Active Directory not sufficient, or what was the problem with federation services? Why it came into picture? So primarily there were two reasons because of which federation services came in. One was single sign-on, SSO. We wanted to use same credentials for all our applications. That's why it came into existence. The second reason could be related to security, because then we were creating forest trusts for a single application access. It could have created a problem. So that was another reason. Another reason was worldwide access. So here what I'm talking about is access anywhere across the globe. That is another reason why it came into existence. So I'm going to briefly explain how these two fit into our scenario and how does it work exactly into Azure Active Directory. Okay. Now, before I do that, I want to go back to Active Directory and try and show you a little bit as to how exactly it was earlier and what was the challenges which made ADFS come in. So of course, we understand now that, traditionally we had domain controllers, we had applications, blah, blah, blah. And then the problem. So go back 10, 12 years before. So those of you who are experienced and who were working like in the era of 2008-10, you would probably relate it to me. Not that the present ones or those people who are joined who are probably new to IT won't. You will still be able to relate to what I'm saying. Traditionally, you might have observed when, in your organization, you've got multiple application. For example, you've got this app one. Let's say this is a HR app, okay? Some HR based app. And then I have got another application, which is app two. Maybe it is a payroll app. Now what happens is when I try to log in, I as an end user, when I have to log in, I log into my machine using my Active Directory credentials. But when I have to log in to one of these apps, I have to use a separate credentials for logging onto these apps. So basically, I as an end user, when I want to log in to my machine, I use the Active Directory credentials. But if I want to access this payroll app to see my payslips, then there's a separate credentials for this. So it is not in synergy. So there's a separate directory service for this. Okay, there's a separate directory service for this. Now the problem which came because of this is, as a user, I had to remember 3 credentials, which was very difficult. 3 or more credentials. So different apps in my organizations had different credentials. Now, what is the problem with these 3 is that I don't get an SSO. This is the problem which I face because of having different credentials in my environment. Now, here is where ADFS came to our rescue. So this was our domain controller. I had few application like app 1, app 2, app 3. Now what we did is, now the reason why these apps first of all had different credentials is they were not compatible with domain controller. They were not compatible with the authentications which the on-premises Active Directory was using, which was Kerberos, LDAP, and those kind of protocols. These applications did not understand. Mostly these applications were non-Windows, maybe Linux, or maybe some third-party open source applications. They did not understand this. That is why there came a need of ADFS. And how ADFS helped them is ADFS act as a mediator for these applications. What these applications did is they integrated themselves with federation services. When they integrated with themselves with federation services, essentially what happened is the domain controller was able to authenticate these applications with the help of ADFS. Now, what did it do for my user? I only had to remember one credential, which was of this domain. I could access my HR app, my payroll application, everything using the single credential, which helped me achieve single sign-on. This is an important term, guys, from our future discussions perspective as well. So the entire idea for this was single sign-on. Now, how did it help you from a user? Of course, it gave you single sign-on. From an Active Directory perspective, I had to protect my Active Directory. Okay, I didn't have to protect 4 Active Directories. Instead, what I did is I only protected one Active Directory. I made it secure. I added conditions like MFA, blah, blah, blah into these, which helped me make it secure. That's how ADFS helped me achieve single sign-on in my environment. Now, another thing which ADFS did is, now as you all might know, Kerberos is an internal protocol. So it works within the within the network. It is not an internet routable protocol, which means I can't get myself authenticated over the internet using Kerberos, because as an end user, you always need the DC in the line of sight. Here's where ADFS came into picture, because what we did is we installed ADFS in the environments. Okay. And ADFS had access to DC, and then we installed some ADFS proxies. Okay, which was in DMZ, to be precise, which was exposed to the internet. Now, what this did is, as an end user, I could access my application via proxy, and I never reach the internet, but I'm always accessing it via proxy. This helped me in giving me ability to access the applications internally. Access the internal applications externally using modern protocols. Now, what kind of protocols were these? These were WS Federation, SAML, OpenID Connect, OAuth, industry standard protocols, which I'm talking about here. So to summarize, ADFS helped us in I won't say shortcoming, but ADFS helped improve authentication across in giving us single sign-on experience. Another thing which it helped us is with accessing application across the globe securely. By securely, I mean it works on HTTPS, which means over port 443. That is how it helped me secure things. Okay. All right. So we've understood a little bit of basics of what Active Directory is, how did it came through, what Active Directory Federation Services is. Though I want to touch on these topics a little bit more in the next couple of minutes. But yeah, so we have basically understood what these are, how do they stand, and how, where was it used traditionally. Now, let's try to understand what Azure Active Directory is. So as you know, Azure Active Directory is a SaaS-based service, which means a software as a service, which means it is a service which is completely managed by Microsoft in this case. Okay. Another thing is it is multi-tenanted. Okay. By multi-tenant, what it means is there are many people or many organizations across the globe who are using Azure Active Directory for their services. Like, for example, your organization, let's say someone who's joining here is from Capgemini. Someone is from Syntel. Someone is from some other organization. Essentially, all of you are using Azure Active Directory. So for Microsoft, you guys are tenants for us. Okay. Essentially, we are hosting your directories with us. So we are a multi-tenant directory service. Okay. Built-in support for global scale, reliability, and availability available across the groups. Remember now the reason why I'm talking about availability here is because I discussed sites. So when we were discussing AD sites and how different virtual location helped us, Active Directory, Azure Active Directory service is essentially a service which is available across the globe. It is available where you are. So that helps in the concept of bring your own device or any device anywhere kind of concept with meeting the organizational security standards. How does it meet it? We'll try to cover it a little bit when we move next. Azure AD is backed by 99.9% of SLA with Azure AD Premium or Basic. What can you do with it? Traditionally, what did Active Directory do? Okay, so Active Directory, so I'm moving back again here. So Active Directory is essentially a database, and that database contained your users, computers, objects, principals. Similar things is can be resided into Azure Active Directory as well. Basically, it can be used to centrally manage your users and cloud resources. What can be my cloud resources in today's world? It can be your machines, your laptops, your mobile devices, your iOS, Android devices, your tablets, your servers. All these could be your resources. Along with that, it could be your mailboxes, some application, users, of course, which you're using. So any of these would be my cloud resources. What can I do with it? I can extend my on-prem Active Directory to the cloud. This is something which I'll explain later. Now, what does it help me? It helps me achieve single sign-on. Single sign-on on the same principle I discussed in the previous slides, wherein ADFS helped me. If I've got three different applications with three different credentials, I don't need to use three different credentials. I can integrate them with ADFS. Similarly, for Azure Active Directory, I can integrate my cloud applications to authenticate with Azure Active Directory. I can integrate my cloud application or my on-prem applications. I can integrate them with Azure Active Directory. How does it help? It helps me achieve single sign-on so that I don't have to use different passwords for different applications. I use the same password for all my applications, which are integrated with Azure AD or with ADFS. Few of the other features which it came in is some security features like multi-factor authentication, conditional access, and these kind of things, which help me secure this in a better way. Okay, so that is essentially one of the things which it helped me as well. I'll give you a short demo of Azure Active Directory in probably in the later part of the section. But yeah, so I just want to cover the basics. So from my understanding, if I'm studying any topic, it is important for me to first understand a one-line definition or a short definition of any subject. And once I understand it fully, then you could potentially move to the next step once your concept is clear. So essentially what I meant is like how Active Directory was a database for users, computers, and centralized management, Azure Active Directory is a multi-tenant service that provides enterprise level identity and access management for the cloud. That is what it is doing. Okay. Now, I'll take some questions before I move to the next slides, but I just want to explain this slide for you. This is kind of a summary of what I've told you so far. So we have got on-premise Active Directory or other Active Directory, which we have synchronized with Microsoft Azure Active Directory, which helps us integrating various Microsoft, non-Microsoft internal applications with the cloud by using single sign-on, which means same credential as my on-prem. So the credentials which are used to log into the machine, same credentials can be used to log into my email, same credentials can be used to log into my apps, same credentials can be used to log into some of the cloud apps using Azure Active Directory. This is where Azure Active Directory fits into your environment, and a lot of you are observing this right now. Okay, in terms of similarities, how Azure Active Directory is similar to on-prem Active Directory. I'm sorry if this is a black and white diagram and you don't like it, but unfortunately I couldn't find a better diagram for this. But if you see, this is my Contoso Corporation on the left, and on the top it is my cloud, and at the bottom is my on-premises. On my on-premises, traditionally, if you concentrate on the slide on the lower half, traditionally, I had Active Directory, Exchange, SharePoint, LDAP was the protocol used for authentication, and then I had some LOB apps which were using LDAP to access my Active Directory. Now, this has been replaced, or this has been upgraded for better with Microsoft Active Directory. Now, from what traditionally we used to use on-prem, we have Exchange Online for us. SharePoint Online is there. How LDAP was the access protocol on-prem, Graph API is the access protocol in Azure. And of course, like how you had many applications integrated with your Azure Active Directory, now we have got various LOB apps integrated with us. Okay, so I would like to pause for a few seconds and try to understand if you guys have any questions before I move to the next part, wherein I'm going to explain you a little bit on the features, similarities between AD and Azure Active Directory. Okay, since there's silence, I assume we don't have any questions right now. So I'll move on to the next part. Okay, so let's try to compare your on-prem Active Directory with Azure Active Directory. So this
So,
is where, yeah,
Zoheb,
sorry, is there a question?
sorry. I had a question.
Hmm.
As per my understanding, Azure Active Directory is like a service which act as an authenticator between different apps, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, so if I want to access any kind of service let's say I want to access Azure Blob Storage or something, then I have to first authenticate myself through the Active Directory and then I can access all those services, right?
You are correct to some extent, yes. However, the reason why I said some extent is it depends what exactly you're using. So, for example, to access any service, you can use Azure Active Directory as an authentication mechanism. That is completely possible, but you need to integrate that application also with Azure Active Directory. Like if I have to say about some apps, like Exchange Online is an app which is integrated with Azure Active Directory. Some of the portals can be integrated with Azure Active Directory. Now, if you're talking about specifically storage, blobs, or any types of, or specifically storage, uh, I don't know if that is by default integrated or is there a way to integrate it, but yeah, pretty much it is an authentication and authorization mechanism to access any resources, cloud or in-house, which are integrated with it.
Okay. My next question, it's a little bit off topic,
Hmm.
but related to Active Directory. So suppose if in I have created a program, I want to access like some services of Azure using that program. So then I need to register that application on Active Directory, or do I have a sample of Active Directory in my code which directly which eliminates this registration of our app on Active Directory?
Okay, so actually that's not a off-topic question. That is very much relevant to our discussion, and I'm going to cover it probably
Okay.
after 30 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
I'll specifically talk about it. But yeah, that's a good question, and it's very much relevant. I see someone also asked a question: can I eliminate Active Directory? So I'll leave it at as the last question. Okay, so can we eliminate on-prem Active Directory and can we completely move? Can an organization completely be on Azure Active Directory? I'll leave it at the last because I have something to share it with you, through which, I mean, you can debate if it's possible or if it's not possible, but yeah, we can definitely have a discussion on that. Okay, so I'll move on. Okay, so what I was saying is, maybe I'll take your question, just put your question on the chat. There's a lot of disturbance, and maybe we can take it at the later part, but I'll move on to some of the comparisons with Active Directory and Azure Active Directory. Okay, and what I'll try to explain you is how do they compare with each other, and how essentially Azure Active Directory fits in, where in comparison with the feature of Active Directory on premises, which we had. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to list down some of the features which were present in on-prem Active Directory and how does it compare with Azure Active Directory. Some of the features or some of the stuff which we used to do for administration. So to start with, typically for Active Directory, we would domain join machines. Okay, so we would typically domain join machines in Active Directory, and we would use them for various other purposes. So this is the start for any Active Directory. Okay, any Active Directory environment, you will enroll or domain join machines in Active Directory. Another operations which I will do in my Active Directory environment is I will use group policies. So group policy I will use essentially to to govern my machine. Like maybe I don't want a command prompt to be accessible. Maybe I don't want them to execute any unknown PowerShell script or unsigned PowerShell script. I can govern this using group policy infrastructure. Another things which I could do is I could establish Active Directory trusts with any organization. Another things which I could do using my on-prem Active Directory is used for access. So basically, if I have some applications like Exchange or something who wants to access the GAL or anything, in that scenario, I will be able to access Active Directory using protocols like LDAP. LDAP is Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. This is something which I can use. Now, another thing which I'm able to think right now, which I'll be able to use for Active Directory is maybe access some of the file services. Okay. Another thing which I'm able to think right now is to give permission, which is ACLs, ACLs. Now, how does it compare with Azure Active Directory? With Azure Active Directory, we are able to do an Azure AD join. So what we do is we join the machines using Azure AD join feature, which is built in Windows 8 and above. Windows 7 also it's possible. We used to call it workplace join to start with, but it is pretty much possible with Windows 8 and above. You can Azure AD join all your devices to Azure Active Directory. Now, what was the reason we did this for Active Directory is to manage. This is the same reason you would do it for your in Azure Active Directory also. Traditionally, we had group policy to manage controls into the environment. With Azure Active Directory, you can pretty much do what you were able to do using group policy using Intune. Okay. I'm not an expert with Intune, but yeah, using Intune, you will be able to manage your devices which are hybrid join. Now, what does devices mean for you? By devices, I mean not just your machines or servers. It means your iOS, Android, mobile devices, anything you will be able to join, you will be able to use or manage using Intune. Okay. The way we access Active Directory is with LDAP. Similarly, for this, you can use your Graph APIs to access Azure Active Directory. In the way we managed permission with which was through access control list, you would use Azure Active Directory user and permission, or you could say claims through which you'll be able to manage these. Uh, Traditionally, Active Directory users used Kerberos or NTLM as the authentication protocol. In this case, we use various protocols like WS-Fed, SAML, OAuth. These kind of protocols are used for authentication and authorization for my Azure Active Directory. So if you compare many of these things and pair my writing, there are many things which are in comparison. But what has happened is we have moved on from a traditional environment to a modern environment. And this was the need of the hour because you can't imagine yourself with mobiles. Like I won't imagine in 2008 or 7 all the users with smartphones in my organization. But in today, almost all the users have smartphone in the organization. So there comes the need for Azure Active Directory and a modern directory service, which can do much more than what your traditional Active Directory was doing. Okay. Now, talking about the different editions of Azure Active Directory, there are at least 3 to 4 different editions, which we call it. Some people can merge Office 365 apps with free or basic edition of Azure Active Directory as well. But I don't want to go into detail of what these individual editions are, but free or basic is the one which you get for free. Office 365 apps, I have included it separately because a lot of organizations are not they don't want to go on Azure AD, but they have emails. So they use some of the features of Azure AD using Office 365 portals and other things. So those features which they get are respected to what kind of licenses they have with Office 365 and here also, or M365 now. And here also Microsoft is trying to streamline this. Azure AD Premium P1 and Azure AD Premium P2 are some of the higher versions of Azure Active Directory, which the enterprises would have. It has many features which is not there in free or basic versions, like the multi-factor authentication comes built in. Then there are features like conditional access, which is not available in the earlier version, self-service password reset, Azure AD password protection. These kind of features are not present in the earlier versions of Azure Active Directory or the earlier editions, which is written here, but it is obviously available with the premium version. Of course, when it comes to the premium version, it is much more expensive than the earlier version. So P1 and P2 are the more expensive version or editions of Azure Active Directory. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take you through a little bit on how essentially my synchronization happens and how do I synchronize my on-prem Active Directory with Azure Active Directory and what are the different options do I have as an organization to synchronize. So this chart explains it in at a very nice summary as to what all different kind of options you can look at. So from a cloud authentication perspective, you've got cloud only. Now what cloud only means is it is not integrated with uh, on-prem, and that's not the topic of discussion because usually if you talk about any organization, any medium organization itself, they will have on-prem Active Directory in cloud, on-prem Active Directory. So cloud only authentication is only for organizations who are not at all on-prem and they're completely on cloud. The second and third is on the left, which is your password hash sync and pass-through authentication. So password hash sync is where your password hashes are synchronized with Azure Active Directory. Now, what does this mean for your organization? What this means is you will be able to authenticate directly via Azure Active Directory. Okay, so you are able to authenticate directly via Azure Active Directory without any without no involvement from on premises during the authentication process. Okay. Pass-through authentication is something which Microsoft came up with a couple of years back, which is in which the authentication still happens on-prem with some pass-through authentication agents. I'll explain it in the next few slides in a little bit more detail. And then we've got, of course, the Active Directory Federation services. Traditionally, when Microsoft started with this, Traditionally, when Microsoft came up with Azure Active Directory, we used to do it only using ADFS. But now we've got multiple options which we are exploring, which is with password hash sync, pass-through authentication, and of course, the traditional one, which is with federation services. Now, before I move to discuss a little bit more detail as to how these three come into picture and how you can decide what suits for your organization, or how you can see what your organization is using, I would like you to take you through and just to give you a little bit of understanding as to what exactly I'm talking about for those who are hearing Azure AD Connect term for the first time. Okay, so synchronization of your on-prem identities with Azure is done by essentially a tool called as Azure Active Directory Connect. This tool essentially needs to be in the line of sight of your domain controller for you to do that. Okay. And with that, there are various ways you can do it. So I'll try to explain you this in a little bit more detail now. So before I move to the details, let me give you a little bit of history of this also. Now, when Azure AD Connect came in at first, it was called as DSync, which is also known as directory synchronization. Okay, so it was first called as DSync. Then they rebranded it and called it Azure AD Sync. And since last few years, it is known as Azure AD Connect. This is the name which you see right now as well. Uh, the background architecture, or in the way this has been built, is it is a small version of MIM, Microsoft Identity Manager. So it's essentially kind of built on MIM, wherein they tried to do a smaller version of MIM to help you do this kind of synchronization. Now let's try to understand how exactly this would work. Okay, so this is my Azure Active Directory, which is in cloud. And then of course, I have my on-prem Active Directory, domain services. And like always, I have a domain controller on-prem. Now I want to synchronize my cloud identities with Azure Active Directory. For this purpose, in my on-prem environment, or this could be, you could argue that you could use this in Azure as well as a service, as a VM. So essentially, what I'll do is I'll install a VM, or a machine rather, with the role which is Azure AD Connect. This is responsible for synchronizing my identity with Azure Active Directory. Okay, so essentially what I'm going to use is three different methods in which I'm going to use, which is something which I tried to explain you earlier, which is cloud only, password hash sync, pass-through authentication, ADFS, or other parameters. Any of these three I can use with when I'm synchronizing Azure AD Connect. So this is something which is mandatory for you to use, but of course you can eliminate or you can decide on what all things you're going to use. Okay, so coming back to this again, so this is my domain controller, and then this is my cloud, which is my Azure Active Directory, and I'm looking for a mechanism to synchronize my my on-prem identity with cloud. So what all options do I have? So I'm going to do is I'm going to install a Azure AD Connect server, which is responsible for doing this. Now with Azure AD Connect, as we discussed, you have got three options. The first option is password hash sync. What this is going to do is, if there is a user who wants to access any cloud resources, he'll be able to access it directly, and Azure AD will be self-sufficient to authenticate it. The second option could be pass-through authentication. In pass-through authentication, the authentication will still happen on-prem. In that case, you would install agents to on-prem or on machines. You'll install the pass-through authentication agents, and you'll be able to get yourself authenticated. In this scenario, the password hash is not synchronized with Azure Active Directory. And of course, we have got the third option, which is more of a traditional option, which is with Active Directory Federation Services. In this case, you need to deploy an ADFS infrastructure on-prem and then decide what and then basically that will be your authentication mechanism. I'm going to explain this in a little bit more detail in the coming slides. Okay. So this is the typical structure which I spoke about. So I have got my public cloud or my Azure Active Directory here, and then essentially I'm using, this is the example of pass-through authentication, which is the second option, which I showed you. In this example, as you can see, you've got the PTA agent install on-prem, which is in line of sight, important, in line of sight of your Active Directory, and you're still going to need Azure Active Directory Connect in any situation. So that is something which I'll need anyways, okay, irrespective. So that's how the structure is. In this case, from an authentication perspective, when I try to access any cloud app, it will first go to the cloud, then it will get redirected. It will try to find the agent which works on a pull model, and then that's how I'll get authenticated. Again, passwords are not stored in cloud when it comes to pass-through authentication. No password is stored in cloud. Okay. The other option you have is the federation services. In this case, what you're doing is, again, you are installing Azure AD Connect in this case, which is how you do it anyways in any situation. This Azure AD Connect is going to pick up your data from your on-prem Active Directory. Now, as a user, when I try to access any Azure AD integrated application, for example, let's say Exchange Online. In that case, Exchange Online is going to redirect me to Federation Services, which is going to be on-prem. In this case also, no password is synchronized with my Azure Active Directory. Authentication is completely happening in a situation which is completely on-prem. Cloud identity is only used for redirection. It only has data about users and the identity, but it does not have any password information. This is how it was traditionally, but then of course password hash sync and pass-through authentication came in, which gave organizations a little bit more, you know, options as to how exactly they want to go about it, which they are able to choose right now. Another thing which another reason why Microsoft came up with this is because obviously they wanted there were many people who or many organization or governments who were hesitant on synchronizing their passwords, which is quite scary. To be honest, it is not. Actually, the passwords are more secure in cloud than they are on-prem. But yeah, that is something which is a different discussion altogether. But what I'm trying to say here is you get all these three options right now. And the reason why Microsoft came up with PTA or Federation Services is to give organizations a better opportunity. Okay, so what do I choose? Okay, from all these three options I have, what do I choose? Which one should I go for? Should I go for pass-through authentication, password hash sync, ADFS? Which one is how my cloud identity should be synchronized, which is the important and the basic questions which will come up to you. So there are many deciding factors. So as it is stated in the diagram, typically, if I'm using password hash sync, what is going to happen is if I'm going to access any application, and this application we are presuming it is integrated with Azure Active Directory already. So when you try to access this application, obviously as a first step, you try to access the application. Application essentially is supposed to tell you that, you know what, you need to get redirected to Azure AD, which is my authentication provider. Once you get redirected to Azure Active Directory, through this process, essentially, what is going to happen is Azure AD, considering it's a password hash sync, it is going to authenticate you. If it would have been Federation Services or anything different, it would have been different in this case. But considering it is password hash sync, It is Azure AD itself has ability to issue token, and then you are able to authenticate yourself and finally access the application. Okay, so this is how your flow will be in case of password hash sync. Now, which organization is essentially going to use password hash sync? An organization who's going to use password hash sync is an organization who doesn't have problems with synchronizing their passwords. And a lot of organizations may have problems. However, this is the recommended method of using, because you get best SLAs when you use password hash sync with Azure Active Directory. Okay. The second method is, which we spoke about, was with pass-through authentication. And I'll go back to this slide. In this case, what is going to happen is, as a user, when you try to access an application, which is your first step, the user will be redirected to Azure Active Directory. And then this Azure Active Directory will contact these PTA agents. So these agents, you install it on servers, which are in line of sight of your Active Directory. And that is how they get authenticated. So user will be, the token will be returned by Azure Active Directory directly. However, this works on the pull model. In this case also, password is not shared with Active Directory or with Azure Active Directory. It works on agents, which is fine, but some organizations may have problems with this also. But traditionally, this is how it has been working, and this is how a lot of organizations, a few of the organizations you would see right now. But there is a problem with ADFS. The problem is, as an organization, I have to maintain federation services. So I will try to cover a little bit about ADFS as to what it would need in a good design, what kind of ADFS infrastructure I'm looking at, and what kind of risk it poses in comparison to password hash sync and pass-through authentication. So if I have to explain you a little bit, like very basics, okay? Let me change. Okay, so any environment would of course have an Active Directory, which I'm going to show it here as domain controller. Now, within that Active Directory, what it is going to need is, you're going to need your federation services. I'm going to name it as FS, which stands for ADFS. At the bare minimum, you would obviously want 2 federation services. Now, if there is true, then you are essentially looking at some load balancing capability as well. Okay. And then in your DMZ, essentially, you're looking at installing some proxy services, which is going to be your web server, as it is shown in the other diagram also. So this is going to be my proxy. OK, and this proxy is also load balanced. And outside this is my internet, OK, which is my internet. Now, if you see noticeably, the problem with this architecture is there are various layers. So even if one of these layers go down, this or this or this, my Azure AD authentication can go for a toss, which means that even if federation services go down, I have to ensure that they are highly available. And then even if my WAP goes down, it needs to be highly available. If it is not, my entire organization's Azure Active Directory goes down. Now, another complication. So I'm not trying to tell you that you should not do it, but I'm just trying to explain it to you. So let's imagine you have got federation services, which is behind a load balancer. Now, federation services can use WID, which is your Windows internal database, but sometimes there can be a need if you have very high object count, more than 100,000, I suppose, then you might have to use SQL. So if you look at the point of failures which you have in this kind of a situation, which is at your database, okay, you have your federation services, which is your FS, and then you have your proxy. These are the 3 point of failures for Azure Active Directory if you go for federation. However, if you go for pass-through authentication or password hash sync, these are much less, or this does not exist. Now, the architecture which I shared with you of ADFS, which was with the, I'll just share it with you again in a very short format. This is your proxy. Okay, let me redraw it.
I'm
Okay,
not able to view it.
Kasam, can you view my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yeah, we can able to.
Yeah, now right now I'm able to view now. Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
okay. So coming back to this discussion, see now the kind of problems which is going to which will be in front of us is these are the different areas of problem, okay, which I discussed with you briefly. If my proxy goes down, then I'm down. If my ADFS goes down, then I'm down. If my SQL goes down, then I'm down. And of course, if my DC goes down, then I'm down as well in situation of federation. Now, another situation which might come in is I'm considering this as a single site scenario. Imagine if you've got multiple sites across the globe, like if there's a big organization like Microsoft who has offices in every country. What I might have to do is have, if not in every site, at least in 3 or 4 or 5 sites, depending on the number of users I may have, I need to make this kind of infrastructure available, which is going to be highly cost consuming for my organization, right? It's going to take a lot of burden on my organization to maintain these servers and to build a similar architecture across different sites, which is a pain. So that's why I would, when I'm engaging in any discussions as to how my identity could be, I would always look for having it, either password hash sync or pass through authentication, or if you're deploying federation services, in that case, you have to be very careful. You need to ensure the high availability and those kind of things in there. Okay. The next thing which I want to show you is a quick demo. So I'm going to quickly stop sharing and then I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to share my full screen this time. Let me know if you guys are able to see it.
Zoheb,
Mhm.
uh, what are the solutions to overcome those issues that we might face in situation of federation?
See, I have come across these situations multiple times. So if you are in a situation wherein your federation service is down, the first thing is you will try to make it up. If it is going to take forever to come back up, then you ask your organizations to take decision to move to password hash sync or pass through authentication, which is going to solve it very quickly for you. But yeah, so if you're in a situation wherein you are using federation services and you're down, you would probably want to first troubleshoot why your federation service is down. Is your certificate updated, blah blah blah? If it is not, then you plan towards, you also keep a secondary plan towards moving to some better forms of synchronization or authentication.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll move on and I'll try to talk a little bit about, or I'll show you around how actually Azure Active Directory looks like. So we have been discussing about Azure Active Directory, and it's not fair from my side to just give you PowerPoints and not show you anything. So I'll try to show you a little bit as to how it looks like, what it is, and how it works. Okay. So I assume you've got some basic understanding of how uh, you know um, how to navigate to the portal and other things. So all I've done is I've gone to portal.azure.com, which is your Azure portal, Azure public portal. There are multiple ways to access the portal. You can access it through an application on Windows 10, or you can access it through your mobile app, or you can access it through the browser, like how I'm doing. There are other ways to access it through PowerShell or CLI as well. But for this demonstration purpose, for the ease of understanding of everyone, I'm going to access it through the portal to just give you an overview as to how exactly it looks like. So basically what I've done is I have navigated through the portal, went into Azure Active Directory. You could go it into and search for resources here and navigate to Azure Active Directory as well. Here is where you see what my role is. So I'm from a tenant perspective, if I'm a global admin or what kind of admin I have. Now, traditionally, when you are working with Active Directory, you would know that there are certain roles inside Active Directory which are built in. Our traditional Active Directory I'm talking about. So the built-in roles could be domain administrators, enterprise administrators, server operators, security administrators, backup operators, blah, blah, blah. So if I have to just show you quickly, this is my Active Directory, and I'll try to open and give you a gist of how the built-in roles looks like. There it is. So if I have to show you, these are some of the built-in roles like administrators, uh, backup operators, account operators. And if I go here, you might see domain admins, enterprise admins. These are the different types of roles which are built in into my Active Directory. Okay. Similar types of built-in groups are present in Azure Active Directory as well. Like you've got, so actually there are many, like you've got global admins, you have got, where are the roles? Yeah, let me show you through this. So you've got global admins, you have security admins, and these kind of roles which are already present. Like for example, I have this user, and if you look at the kind of roles options I get, there are plenty. Like he can be a group administrator, group readers, password administrator, Power BI administrator, of course, global administrator being the highest. So I don't want to draw a comparison, but if I have to compare this group with an on-prem group, I would compare enterprise admin or domain admin with something like a global administrator, which is here. So this administrator is potentially going to have all the rights for you to manage your Azure Active Directory. Moving here, if you see, this is the main window of Azure Active Directory, wherein it tells me what kind of sign-in attempts have been observed. So there have been around 22 sign-in. What is my domain suffix? In your actual organization scenario, this domain suffix would be of your organization, whatever it is. In my case, of course, I haven't added, if I have any custom domain, I haven't added it. But in your scenario, it would be like at Capgemini, at Microsoft, or your respective organization domain name, which you will see here. You can add custom domain names also. If you have a purchased domain name, you can just do a quick TXT record verification, and you can add yourself into that custom domain as well. This is the navigation pane through which I can manage it. It gives me an overview of the number of users I have in my organization. I've created around 40 users, which is on-prem. This shows me if it is directory synchronized or not. So if you see, this is the user, which is a cloud only user. It is not directory synchronized. All the other users, almost all the other users are directory synchronized. If I go to the user properties, I will be able to see a little bit more if what department it is, what is the first name, last name, country, region, etc. Since this is my test lab, I don't have much details here. Okay. If I have to tell you a little bit about this, so this is where it tells what is my Azure AD Connect status. So, and it also tells me that, what kind of authentication mechanism I'm using. If I'm using password hash sync, if I'm using pass-through authentication, when was the last sync run, is my status enabled, what kind of status I'm in, what kind of health my environment is in. Do I have any sync errors? How is my sync working? Which server is my Azure AD Connect hosted on? For some reason, I'm getting an error here, but never mind. So yeah, this is how essentially it looks like. Maybe I didn't install the Azure AD Connect Health agent, but just to let you know, Azure AD Health Connect agent is an agent which comes in with Azure AD. This agent essentially helps us monitor what kind of health status my Azure AD Connect server is in. From an organizational perspective, what kind of licenses does my organization has? How many of these licenses are being used? Like for example, I have about 100 Azure AD P2 license. I have 250 enterprise mobility and security E5 licenses. I have not assigned it to anyone. So this gives me a status of that. It also gives me a status of who all has signed in to my account, to my Active Directory since last 24 hours, how these authentications had attempts has been, is this MFA'd or if this is not MFA'd, which was the user, where it came from, what kind of location it was from, did it had any conditional accesses, all the audits I can see here. If you are an Azure AD Premium user, you will get logs worth last 30 days. If you're not an Azure AD Premium organization, you will get logs only for the past seven days, I think. So yeah, pretty much this is how it looks. If you want to create users from here, ideally, I don't want to do that. What I would want to do it is this is my on-prem Active Directory. And if I have to create a user, I would create a user here, and that user essentially will replicate. So for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to add Kasam's account in my directory. Okay, I'm going to give it some random password. And I'm going to, so I have created it. I don't know if this is already in, this OU is in sync or not, but I'm going to just move in to my department's OU. And through that, hopefully in the next few minutes, this will sync. Now, just to show you a little bit more on what you can do is, so see, this is my Azure Active Directory Connect wizard, which I have already installed on my domain controller. Ideally, you don't need to install it on domain controller. You could install it on a member server. But for the sake of this lab, I have installed it on the same server, which is my domain controller. Now, I told you about the different types of authentication, which we have here, or different types of the way your credentials can be verified. There are different ways, like there is ADFS, there's pass-through authentication. There can be some third-party third-party authentication solutions as well, which can help us. So this is the page through which you can change it. So right now I have set it to password hash sync. I can change it to pass through. I can change it to federation with ADFS, federation with ping federate. Of course, when I put this federation with ADFS, then I have to specify what ADFS server I'm using, what kind of certificates, blah, blah, blah. Those kind of things I have to put in. If I choose pass through authentication, what it does is, and this is very nice and very, it makes this very easy, and this is probably for an organization who's probably on federation and then they want to move to pass-through authentication. It's very simple. All they have to do is just check this and click on configure. What this is going to do is it is going to install a pass-through agent on the same server itself. Okay, so the first agent which I described in my slides will be installed on the same server. Now all I have to do after this is install it additionally on other member servers. Of course, there are few prerequisites which is needed, which is like there are certain ports or certain URLs, not ports, URLs which needs to be whitelisted. So that is something which is needed. Usually on the Azure AD Connect, the server which you have already installed, all the URLs are already whitelisted because you might have done it when you installed Azure AD Connect. So it's easier for us to just have the first agent installed here. So yeah, that is something which you can do if you want to check what kind of options do you have or how you have configured your synchronizations, what OUs are being synchronized and other kind of things. This is something which you can see from here as well. Okay, Azure AD Connect comes with another console which is called the Synchronization Service Manager, which is responsible for synchronizing your Active Directory. Now, if you see my Active Directory is being synchronized. So there are two types of synchronization, of course, the delta and full import. So the full import happens at the first time. So you'll see it at the start when I created this Active Directory, but going forward, all it does is it does delta synchronization only. So it doesn't do anything else other than delta synchronization. If needed, I can run, since I've created an object, I can run a delta sync manually as well for it to synchronize it. If I can't wait for a few minutes, which it takes for my newly created users to be synced, I can do that. So if we just have to check, I hope the account which I created is synchronized. Let's verify now. Okay, it's not yet. Maybe the synchronization is happening, but in few minutes, you'll see that account is synchronized with my Azure Active Directory, like how other user accounts are synchronized also. Okay, if I have to create a cloud only user, this is how you can do it. You can create it from here. If there's an existing tenant, you can define it here. You define what kind of groups, what kind of roles you want to be want the user to be assigned. If it's just a normal user, if it's a global administrator, if it's a security administrator, all these kind of rules you are able to define.
Hello, Zoheb. Just one question here for me.
Mhm.
Actually, can we schedule this synchronization period? I mean, if I want every 6 hour it's synchronization, can we schedule it? Or from
It's
where we schedule it?
It is doable, but actually it happens much faster than that. So essentially the delta synchronization runs like I think every 5 minutes or something, and it's not a heavy process for it to take a lot of time to synchronize. So yeah, so you can schedule it using your synchronization rules editor, which I showed you, but ideally it's best you keep it the way it is. You should not modify it.
Okay, okay, Zoheb.
Okay. Now, another thing here is there are,
Well,
of
I
course,
have a small question. Sorry.
yeah, go
So
ahead.
this synchronization you are doing from Azure Active Directory to your on-prem stuff you're doing, is it right? Or is it both the way? It may be a small
Yeah,
question. So
that's a good question. So, how am I doing the synchronization? I'm doing the synchronization from my on-prem Active Directory to Azure Active Directory. This is how you would typically do it. You won't do it the other way. Okay, you will typically do it from on-prem because your on-prem directory is already there, and your Azure Active Directory is something which is new. However, there are certain features, and I'm underlining the word certain features which can be written back. Okay, so if your question is if I create a user in Azure Active Directory, will it sync back to on-prem? It will not. Okay, however, there are certain things which can sync back. So what I'm trying to set a bottom line here is the synchronization essentially is from on-prem to Azure. There are certain parameters which can synchronize reverse also. Typically passwords and groups, they are able to write back to Azure Active Directory as well. There are not a lot of other things which can write back to your on-prem Active Directory. Okay.
yeah, thank you. One more
You
question.
said that
Sorry.
it is certain things.
So in the
Zoheb,
case of
where you said certain things.
Okay. Sorry, so I'll just move on a little bit and maybe I'll take questions after a few minutes. Okay, my apologies. So I just want to complete this because I realize there might be some questions related to this. Now, otherwise, if you see some of the other options which we have is related to the administrative units, like how we had organizational units previously. Microsoft came up with administrator units only recently. So this was not there few months back. It was only recent. I can't remember when it was released. Now, another thing is if I have to integrate any applications, which could be some third-party applications or some custom-made applications on-prem, I am able to integrate these enterprise applications with my Azure Active Directory from here. So how the concept of relying party, if you know, was with ADFS, similar concept is there for these enterprise applications with Azure Active Directory. And if I have to explain you a little bit more, uh, um, from a security standpoint, okay, um, this is something which is very important, and these are some of the features which you get with Azure Active Directory. Is what kind of risks does my organization have, and how do I want to protect my identity? Like what kind of if there's a user which is detected as a risk, like for example, a user who has traveled to multiple locations within minutes, is that's not humanly possible, right? So there's a possibility someone is trying to do an attack or a compromise in my environment. So there are certain security and identity protection uh, you can apply in your organization as a baseline. This is something which you should apply, and then there are certain best practices, but of course it has certain limitations from Microsoft from a licensing perspective here. Okay. Okay, so I'll move on to some of the other things which I want to discuss, because I realized we are at 20 minutes, so we have 40 minutes more. So this should give us sufficient time to take your questions as well. But I just want to cover some of the other topics as well, which is a part of our discussion. Okay. Now, this is a very important part which I want to cover, and someone asked me earlier is can I deprecate the on-prem Active Directory completely, and can I completely move to Azure Active Directory? So my response to this question was, it depends. Okay, so it depends on the situation. It depends on what the company requirements are. Is it possible? I would say it is definitely possible for you to eliminate your on-prem Active Directory completely. But here I want to talk about a little bit about the newest directory service in our world today, which is Azure Active Directory Domain Services. So, it's a kind of a tongue twister. So we have got Active Directory Domain Services, we've got Azure Active Directory, and then we have got Azure Active Directory Domain Services. So these are the three different types of directories which are present in the environment. Azure Active Directory Domain Services is pretty similar to how your on-prem directory service is. Now, when I described you the similarities between on-prem Active Directory and Azure Active Directory, you might have noted that I was able to explain similarities, but similarities was in terms of functions. So function means they were able to do domain join in Active Directory. Now we do Azure AD join. These are functions, which is similar, but they are not same. So in other words, group policies are replaced by Intune. LDAP is replaced by Graph APIs. So that's a replacement. However, they are doing similar functions. Now, what does that mean? If I want to use Kerberos authentication with Azure Active Directory, is that possible? No, it's not possible, right? So that functionality is eliminated. However, there's a replacement which is in Azure Active Directory, which might not suit for all. Okay, so it might be suitable for few, it might not be. So just try to understand what I'm trying to explain you. This can get confusing. Okay, I was confused when I read this first. I was very much confused to start with. So I won't blame you if you don't get confused. However, if you do not, then I would assume I have taught it very well for you to not get confused. Okay, I'm just kidding. So Azure Active Directory as a service is integrated with Azure Active Directory tenant. Okay, important. So it is related to my Azure Active Directory. Now, what does it do? It gives me ability to use traditional protocols and traditional methods, like how it was used in Active Directory, like Kerberos, like LDAP, like domain joint, group policies, all these things. It gives me ability to use it without managing it. That's correct. You don't manage it, but you still use it. And I'll show you how. Okay, so I'll try to explain you a little bit of the architecture as to how exactly it works. And then let's see. So on-prem, I've got Active Directory Domain Services. This is my DC. We all know, we all understand by now that, Azure AD Connect is used to synchronize my on-prem identity with the cloud. So this is my cloud. So this is my Azure Active Directory. So I am using my on-prem identity to synchronize using Azure AD Connect with the cloud. Okay, but there's a service which is called as Azure Active Directory Domain Service. Now what this does is this service is capable of of authenticating over Kerberos. This can work with LDAP. This supports domain join. So, essentially what it is supporting is it is supporting quite a few legacy protocols for me. So it is able to support Kerberos, it is able to support NTLM, it can do domain join, so it can do quite a lot of stuff which I was not able to do with Azure Active Directory. That is probably the reason why it is kind of important for me to understand how exactly it's doing. So my typical architecture is I've got on-prem Active Directory synchronizing with Azure Active Directory in the cloud. And then there is a need. So for example, let's imagine a scenario. You have got um, you have a virtual network in Azure, okay? And inside that virtual network, okay, I don't know how it, let me just try to redraw this to make it a little bit smaller because I think I'll need this to be smaller. Okay, so here we are. Okay, so this is my on-prem domain controller. And then of course, I'm using AD Connect. So I'm going to say Azure AD Connect to synchronize my on-prem identity with Azure Active Directory. Okay, this is what I'm doing. This is my cloud. Okay, now I have certain so I have a virtual network in my Azure. Okay, so this is your VNet. I have a virtual network. As you might have understood by now, that virtual network is a network boundary. It is kind of a VLAN, what we call it on-prem. Now, in this VLAN or VNet in Azure, I have got few applications which are using some legacy authentication, and I want to be able to access those. I want to be able to those applications which are using legacy protocols needs to access the domain controller. Now, how do I do it? One option I have is to promote domain controllers in Azure, which is okay, but it can be a problem because then I have to manage these, I have to patch it, and then there are some security concerns as well, which organization may have. So I don't want to do that. Instead, alternatively, what you can use is there is a service which is called Azure AD Azure ADDS service, Azure Active Directory Domain Service. And what this service does is it synchronizes with Azure Active Directory, and this is a one-way sync. Okay, important. It synchronizes from Azure Active Directory to Azure Active Directory Domain Services. And then these DCs are placed inside a virtual network. So there are two DCs which Microsoft creates. These DCs are essentially managed by Microsoft. They are taken care by Microsoft. Their patching, their upgrade cycle, all the things which are needed, that is something which is done by Microsoft. Now, how do you manage it? What you can do is you can create a jump host, okay, which is like a management server inside this VNet for you to be able to govern group policies, add group policies, join your machines, those kind of things. Okay, you will be able to do it. So to summarize, what happens here is you have an on-prem environment, which is an on-prem Active Directory, which synchronizes. So you use Azure AD Connect to synchronize this with Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory in turn uses Azure Active Directory in turn synchronizes this with Azure Active Azure Active Directory Domain Services. That's how it is happening, which resides inside a VNet. You get two IP addresses. This is completely managed by Microsoft. By managed, I mean you do not have domain admin or enterprise admin rights on this DC. You do not have that. All you are is a help desk admin. So you do not have any permissions on this active, any high privilege permissions. Now you might ask me why I don't have that, because you probably don't need it. You don't need to have those high privileged permissions because Microsoft is managing this for you. So if I have to give you some applications which work very well with this is SAP for HANA. It works very well with Azure Active Directory domain services. In fact, Microsoft gives better SLAs when you use SAP for HANA with Azure Active Directory domain services. I can imagine there can be many other scenarios also in which you might be able to use Azure Active Directory domain services in your environment. But does that replace your on-prem Active Directory? I would say no. Can Azure Active Directory replace your on-prem Active Directory? Potentially, yes. And there are many more reasons for you to believe my yes, considering we are working in the world of COVID since March. So people have learned how to use it. People have learned how to manage. People have learned how to manage computers of people who are working from home using Intune and some other features, device enrollment. Organizations have learned how to manage mobile devices. Uh, Using mobile device enrollment and mobile device management solutions. So there are many reasons for you to believe that yes, it is definitely possible for an organization to survive without on-prem Active Directory. But again, I'm not giving a statement. I'm just it's a statement which is dependent on multiple scenarios. Okay. All right. So I'll move on. Okay. To Azure AD conditional access, I want to cover a few features before I open this to question and answers completely. So, what does Azure AD conditional access helps? So, simple example: portal.azure.com is a public portal for Azure. You don't want anyone to have access to it. You can define a condition that if you want to access portal.azure.com, you need to do MFA. You need to be a member of this group. You need to access it from a registered device. So all these kind of conditions I can add to use Azure AD conditional access. This helps me protect my applications in my environment. Okay, so this is something which will help organization, or which helps organization rather, to protect what can be accessed, what can't be accessed, in what situation you can access what. So all the what if conditions when it comes to accessing, this is essentially answered by conditional access. I will give you a quick example. Okay. Okay. So let me go here. Okay. Conditional access. So I'm going to create a new policy. Okay. I'm going to name it as, let's give it any name, probably Dear Azure. And then I define who all this policy is going to affect to. I say all users, just for the sake of discussion. And then I'm going to select what cloud apps I want. I want to have selected applications, or if I want to any action from the user, do I want him to register some security information? So I'm going to say, okay, you know what, just go ahead for all the apps. Or alternatively, I can choose applications from here like ATP, Office 365, Cloud App Security, blah, blah, blah. I can choose which are my mission critical applications and what applications I want to give access to. What kind of conditions I want this access to be. So if the user is detected as high or medium risk, I want this policy to apply. If the sign-in risk is high, medium, or low, or no risk, I still want this policy to be applied. What kind of device platforms should it be? Should it be selected devices? For example, maybe Windows, iOS, Android phone. Let's say your organization is only in India or in UAE. You only want trusted locations to be allowed. So I define that You define what kind of client apps you want. You define the device status. Is the device status enrolled, or what exactly this is going to be? This is, I see this is still a preview feature. A preview feature means it is available, but it is still in preview. So Microsoft is working on it. What kind of restrictions you want to have? Do I want to grant access? If I grant access, do I want them to require MFA? Do I want them to be hybrid Azure AD joint? What is my requirement? I can define it. So essentially, in summary, this is what I tried to explain here. You define the conditions based on what parameters you want to allow any apps access to your environment. This is what conditional access is. This can be for any of your cloud integrated applications. Of course, this has certain licensing limitations in terms of Azure AD Premium and other things. Okay, I'm going to just skip this slide. This is just exactly what I just showed it to you. Okay. Another thing, which is a feature of Azure Active Directory, is Azure AD password protection. We all know, in the kind of world we are living in, identity is the main thing which you want to protect in your environment. Identity is the real risk. So who I am saying who I am is an important parameter for you to find out. Like, for example, Kasam is organizing this Dear Azure thing, and it is great. It is nice that he is doing that. But how does he claim that he is what he is? There needs to be certain identity. And for him, the identity is virtual all these days. And identity as a perimeter is most important for any organization. So what is important for an organization is to be able to protect your people from any kind of compromise. Azure AD password protection helps you achieve that. What it does is Microsoft has a telemetry data of the world, wherein what kind of passwords are the attacker using for brute force? What are the commonly used passwords in the world? Like, p@55word, summer at 123, Monday at 123, Tuesday at 123. What kind of passwords people are using? How vulnerable these passwords are from a security score? Azure AD password protection helps you minimize this risk for your on-prem and cloud environment. What it does is it blocks commonly used password in the environment. You might have observed. No, I don't know if you would have observed it in your environments, but if you go to Facebook, it might say that the password strength is very small, or this password is something which you have used before. So that is the risk which I'm talking about, which is something which Azure AD password protection can help you achieve it. If you go to my blog link, which is aka.ms/Zoheb, I've written a blog on password protection, and you might get some very useful information on this part. But considering time, I'm not going to cover this in more detail. Okay, I think I duplicated this slide. Okay. Or did I? No. So the other thing is self-service password reset. So this is another feature of Azure Active Directory. Essentially, what self-service password reset does is I'm able to reset my password from anywhere after meeting certain security criteria. This has been a major issue for organizations, and Azure AD, this feature of Azure Active Directory really helps you with this, wherein you are able to reset your password by obviously passing some checks, MFA, or answering certain kind of security questions, and you are able to reset your passwords. Self-service password reset works in all the three scenarios of authentication which we discussed, which is password hash sync, pass-through authentication, and ADFS. So you are able to reset your passwords with Azure self-service password reset. This has been particularly useful for organizations in COVID time, that you are able to reset your password without being in your CorpNet. Alternatively, with your Windows machines also, you have an agent through which you can reset the password. So you don't have to be in CorpNet. You can log into the web portal of self-service password reset and go ahead and reset it. Okay. Another thing which comes with Azure Active Directory features is Azure MFA for me, Azure MFA is one thing which gives me a sense of security. So two-factor. For example, when you're doing your net banking, if even if someone is able to steal your password of your net banking, you still have a sense of security because your OTP is with you, which acts like a second factor. And of course, if your phone is compromised and if your password is compromised, then you're gone. In fact, if your phone is compromised, you're gone anyways. But yeah, so second factor gives us some kind of an assurance whenever we are dealing this with anything. Like for example, when you go to your ATM, you have to insert your ATM card physically. So it needs a physical presence. When I'm talking about virtual, after entering the password, then I have to enter some kind of second factor. This is where Azure MFA comes in handy. It is fully integrated with Azure Active Directory. In fact, it is one of the features of Azure Active Directory Premium, which you get as an organization. Okay. The last topic, which I want to cover very briefly, is about Azure AD application proxy. So all this while, I discussed about applications, which are cloud app, which can be integrated with Azure Active Directory. But there are ways in which you can integrate your on-prem Windows integrated authentication apps also using something called as Azure AD application proxy. So you can give your on-prem Windows integrated auths applications modernization by giving them features like Azure Active Directory MFA, Azure AD conditional accesses. Of course, there are certain agents which you have to deploy on-prem for it to work, but yeah, it is completely possible. So I can have my on-prem apps intelligent enough and can still use Azure, still use Windows integrated authentication, which means Kerberos, through Azure AD application proxy. My last topic before I open it to question and answers, and I know there are quite a few questions, which is the privileged identity management. So the thing with privileged identity management, so there are two words which is important for any PIM solution, which is just in time access and just enough administration. Just in time access means you only get access for that, which is a time bound access. Okay. Just enough administration means you are only getting access which you're supposed to get, just enough access. This is again an Azure AD feature wherein you can request higher level access like a global admin, and then there is an approval flow. The approver would get an email, he has to approve it. Those, and there can be scenarios wherein things are auto approved as well. With full auditing, that is something which is totally possible using Azure AD privileged identity management. So essentially what I tried to do is I tried to give you a little bit on the feature side of Azure Active Directory. I know there are quite a lot of features, but I tried to highlight the important ones like Azure AD password protection, which helps us against commonly used password, Azure AD privileged identity management used for just in time and just enough administration, conditional access for me to define conditions based on how this access can be, and then application proxy for me to integrate my on-prem applications as well. Okay. So yes, questions. So I don't know if you want.
This is
Yep.
Anil.
Yes, Anil.
I have a question. So, for example, we are using Azure AD Connect, and for example, on-premises user got locked by entering 3 wrong passwords. I mean, password wrong for 3 times. So now, can we unlock that user from Azure AD?
No. So the unlock needs to happen from on-prem.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and one more question I have. In Azure AD Blade, we have two different things like registering applications and just a minute. So one is app
Registration and enterprise.
Yeah, one is app registrations and another one is enterprise applications.
Correct. So enterprise applications are usually your cloud SaaS-based applications, and app registration is something which is going to be your internal applications, which you're going to register here.
So app registrations are internal.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, fine.
So from what I have understood, I have known is that these two portals are going to be mixed as well, but I can't be 100% on that. But yeah, so app registrations are typically your internal applications.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Zoheb, actually, I have one question. You told that some, I mean, when some user from sync from on-prem to cloud, there is certain variables or attributes need to be set, which is required to sync from, I mean, from on-prem to cloud, like username, email
Right.
address. Is from where we can set it? That is my question. We can set it from Azure AD Connect.
Yes, you can. And actually, by default, Azure AD Connect has all these attributes set automatically. But you can let me see if I remember and if I can show it to you. Yeah, so basically you can set what you want to sync with Azure AD Connect. You can see it somewhere in the metaverse as to what all objects are being synchronized. So see, this is something which is being synchronized right now. All the objects which are being synchronized are checked. The objects which are not, it is unchecked. If you want some additional attributes to be synchronized, you can select those as well.
That means if one of the attributes not present, it not sync, right?
Correct, of course, yes.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
what it does is essentially when you are doing the synchronization, you get an option to choose. Now, what I have done is when I installed this, I chose the default. But yeah, you have an option to define also if you have certain custom attributes which you want to synchronize. Of course, there are certain attributes which are mandatory for you to synchronize. So there's some nice articles. If you search, you'll find it. Some the attributes which are synchronized by default. So some attributes are mandatory, and if you want to synchronize some additional ones, you could do that also.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Thank you very much.
No worries.
Zoheb, can you explain B2B collaboration for?
Actually, I was planning to explain B2B collaboration, but to be honest, that's a very vast topic for us to cover. In fact, B2B and B2C are both the topics which I did not touch at all during this discussion, because for me to touch B2B or B2C, then I had to touch AD and then how B2C works. So it's a very vast topic. So that's why I'm not able to explain it. But yeah, maybe we can have some sessions later for that one.
Thanks.
Hi, Zoheb. Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, Zoheb, see, if you have on-prem applications and after migrating to Azure, can we do a cutover from the on-premise Active Directory to the Azure Active Directory?
See, this question is it's moreover related to an application. So
Yes.
if I have to answer it in a simple word, it is not dependent if your application is in Azure or if it's in on-prem for it to integrate with Azure Active Directory. So for example, if I take a simple example of a web service, okay, web server. Now, if I'm talking about some web server, it can remain on-prem and I can still make it authenticate with Azure Active Directory. So that is something which is totally possible. It doesn't need to go to Azure. Now, there can be scenarios wherein you want to move that web service to a PaaS service in Azure. In that case, you'll have to do some app modification for it to authenticate with Azure Active Directory. But yeah, in either cases, in all the cases, it is totally possible for you to do a cutover. Now, it depends how smooth it is, and of course, it is dependent on various parameters. But yeah, to answer your question, it is definitely possible to do it, but it's a very wide question.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, like with users who are doing authentication through on-premises, when they are synced with Azure Active Directory, later on, when the application is also moved to Azure, then the authentication should work through Azure Active Directory, and they should be out of on-prem syncing.
Correct. So if I have to give you an example of a recent collaboration which I did for a similar purpose. So what we did is essentially it was a similar situation, though we didn't move the application to Azure. But what we did is we changed the authentication provider of an on-prem application, which was doing for ADFS, and then we made it change to Azure Active Directory. This made no difference to the users because essentially what happened is users were referencing ADFS previously. Now they are just getting authentication prompt via Azure Active Directory. So user don't see a change. The slight change which they see is the portal. So it was coming for username and password. ADFS portal was coming previously. Now it is Azure AD. So that's the kind of change which they see. But usually it's quite smooth.
No,
It
I
can
mean,
be
like,
quite smooth.
sorry for that. I mean, which tool where we need to make the change? The pointer changes from on-prem to Azure AD.
So that is dependent on application to application. So it's not something wherein you'll use some Azure AD tool to do the change. It is on the application code, like what code the application is built in, and then you'll make that change.
I thought like AD Azure syncing tool which a connector is there. So maybe
No,
that has some setting where you need to move the pointer from on-prem to Azure AD, something.
No. So yeah, no, it's a completely application based thing. Like for example, if I have a simple IIS website and based on Microsoft IIS server, and if I want to make a change, I'll go to the web config, I'll change the logon URI into that to point it to Azure AD. That's what I'll do.
Okay. Thank you so much.
No worries.
So we have two hands raised, Sohail Qureshi and Abdul. So Sohail, can you just unmute yourself and...
Zoheb, I had this question. Do we have any use cases wherein we only have, AD deployed on the cloud and not the on-prem?
Yeah, there can be scenarios, Sohail, but there are many scenarios wherein organizations are moving towards that route, wherein they have little to no DCs on-prem and everything on cloud. But eventually, what it will come down to is what kind of policies or what kind of restrictions or what kind of dependencies you have with Active Directory on-prem. Okay, do you still have applications on-prem, and what kind of bandwidth you have with the cloud? But there are many organizations today who are completely in cloud and who are not on-prem, and it works very well, but it won't work for all.
So with those organizations who are completely on cloud, so the first question, unlock of user from Azure AD if password is locked. Is that possible?
No. So see, the thing is, So what I meant is by being domain controller on cloud. So there's a difference. Okay. So Azure Active Directory is a PaaS service. Okay. Now organizations can have domain controller on-prem. Okay. Now the domain controller are at multiple sites. So for example, there is Tata. So Tata has site in Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata, probably these three locations. Now what Tata decides is what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my domain controllers to another site, which is going to be an Azure site. So in this case, there is no modernization happening from a domain controller architecture perspective. Azure is just like a site. It is not using Azure Active Directory. It is domain controller in Azure, which is like a VM. So previously it was running on a VMware hypervisor. Now it is running on Azure. So it makes no difference in the functionality which you were getting on-prem and the functionality which you are getting in cloud that ways. Now, when you are talking about user management and another thing, that is something which you are talking about if you're completely cloud. But by cloud based, I mean not using IaaS, also completely using Azure Active Directory. So if you're doing that, then obviously there's no VM or there's no DC. So you can pretty much do unlock or whatever you want to directly from the cloud.
Okay. Yeah.
Someone else also had raised the hand.
Yeah, hi. My business, they have decided that some of the application needs to be, I mean, my partial infra is to be moved to Azure cloud.
Okay.
So the AD sync is happening now. So after 1 year, my company decided to move the complete infra from on-premises to public cloud. So in that case, what is the use case?
So so it depends. See, now there are two ways to do the migration. Okay. One way is a lift and shift. So lift and shift is nothing. So it's like, imagine if you have two data centers, you're moving virtual machines or you're moving from one data center to another. So if you're doing a lift and shift, your applications don't change, your architecture doesn't change, your DCs don't change. It's just a lift and shift of the infrastructure, which is of hypervisors or VMs. That's all you're doing. So that is no change in the way things work. It is exact. So Azure acts like a data center for them. Now, the other part is when you're looking for partial migration or full migration, are you going to modernize your application or are you going to modernize your infrastructure? That is the main question. So there can be two scenarios. The organization might say that, you know what, for now, we'll migrate as is using lift and shift. Some organization may have another strategy, which was a question asked by some other gentleman regarding the auth change. So it depends on what kind of situation you are in, how you're treating your application. If it's a lift and shift project or if it's a app modernization project, what exactly you're dealing with, that will decide how it is going to look basically.
Yeah, let's decide like lift and shift. Because now the partially it is syncing, not partially, the AD is syncing between on-premises and public Azure cloud. So the complete user object, which is located in the on-premises, that is the primary location. Am I right?
Okay, correct.
So after 1 year, the business they have decided to move the complete infra from on-premises to Azure cloud. So how do we manage this object? Because it was syncing from on-premises to Azure cloud. So if I move the complete infra from on-premises to Azure cloud, so this object, how are we going to manage? Do I need to build the complete new domain services?
No,
Active
it will be the same. Let me answer you by asking you a question. Okay, so forget Azure. So here we are talking about infrastructure movement and lift and shift, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you're moving from one, forget Azure. If you're moving, so it is as good as moving from one data center to another. Okay, so if you're moving your infrastructure from one data center to another, what will happen? Nothing will change. The way it was working on data center A, it will continue to work in data center 2. It's just that the hosting of the environment has changed. So what now Microsoft is, or the second site is, it's like a hosting provider. So the way the objects were synchronizing, it will continue to do it because you have just moved your infra as is. So how your VM was running on a Hyper-V or on a VMware stack, you have just moved it to Azure. So yeah, it's pretty much like that. So nothing changes from your infrastructure perspective.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I have two questions. First, in previous discussion, you said that we don't have access on this tenant. So what is the global admin? You said only we are the help desk admin something. So what I understood is right or I don't know.
Okay, so let me answer the first question. So global admin is a Azure Active Directory tenant administrator. Okay, it is used for managing Azure Active Directory. Okay, Azure Active Directory domain services is different. Okay, so it is a managed Active Directory which uses similar protocols like your on-prem AD. You don't have access to that. Okay, which is a different AD. So remember at the start I said Active Directory domain services, Azure Active Directory, and Azure Active Directory domain services. You have full control on your on-prem Active Directory. Azure Active Directory is anyways SaaS. Azure Active Directory domain services, which is the third type, you don't have domain admin or EA rights. So global admin falls into the second bracket, which is for Azure Active Directory. So that's not relevant.
Okay. And the default sync is 30 minutes. What for our we can see when we do any changes, we have to wait. If you are adding any attribute, the cloud user or any attribute.
I think it's much faster. I think password sync is like 2 minutes or something, and object sync is 5 minutes. But I am not 100% on the number.
Okay, so it depends on the organization. For us, it's 30 minutes. We have to wait for any changes, replication, 30 minutes. So it is based on our organization.
So there's a default value for the sync interval, but I don't have it on top of my head. I don't think it is 30 minutes. Maybe you say 30 minutes just so that everyone is sure that it replicates, but it might be happening much quicker than that.
Okay. Thanks.
Zoheb, we have some questions in the chat window.
Okay, let me see the chat. Okay, I'm opening the chat. How long does it take to move from Federation server to PTA in case of Federation server service failure? It not very long, actually. I mean, it's difficult for me to give you an estimate right on top of my head because there's some replication which needs to happen at the Azure Active Directory level as well. But if you have to move, not just in case of failure, but in a general scenario, if you have to move from Federation service to PTA, it is very fast. So all you do is you go to the Azure AD Connect, and as soon as you change, you are live. Yes, you might want to install additional PTA agents on other member servers, which is like a few minutes job. From an overall Azure Active Directory perspective, replication across the globe, I don't know how much time it can take, but from my experience, it's quite quick. But yeah, so you'll have to review it. But from an organizational standpoint or from your perspective, it is very fast. From a service perspective, it might take a little while, but by little while I mean like few minutes and not hours. MFA we can use for on-prem applications also 100%. If you have license, you can use it for on-prem applications also. If you have ADFS, you can integrate Azure MFA with ADFS also. With 2016 Windows Server 2016 ADFS, Azure MFA comes inbuilt. The adapter for Azure MFA is inbuilt, so you can read it. Okay, would you require Azure AD Premium Plan 2 for user, group, and password write back? Yes. Okay, I'm just trying to see if there are any more questions. PTA agent is installed on on-prem domain controllers? No, it is. It can be, but it is not recommended. You can you should install it on member servers. Why we need to authenticate between? Okay, I don't understand this question. Okay, Kasam, I think I've pretty much covered the questions, or at least those which I can read.
There is one question in the bottom from Zoheb. See, he has written, thank you for sharing the knowledge. On-prem supports Kerberos and NTLM protocol, whereas AAD doesn't support.
Correct.
So,
yeah, I can't read that question, but
okay,
yeah, that's
so
true.
So the further question is, so when I migrate on-prem user which uses Kerberos protocol to AAD, which protocol is used by default?
Okay, so if I have integrated an application which is using Windows integrated authentication with Azure Active Directory, what happens is I need Azure AD application proxy in between. Azure AD application proxy does the translation for you. So essentially, even if you are using Windows integrated authentication, Azure AD does the translation. It transforms it into tokens and passes it. That's the function of Azure AD application proxy. So essentially, if you want to integrate any on-prem application which is using Windows integrated authentication, you would need Azure AD application proxy also for it to work. Without that, it doesn't work.
Great. I can see Raj Kamal has raised his hand. Raj, you have any questions
Hi.
or answers?
Yeah. Hi, sir.
Mm-hmm.
I have the AD on cloud, okay, not on-prem. I fully manage through because I create the instances and configure the roles and everything, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So work from home users, how the authentication is happening through that public IP or any agent we need to install on that end user machines?
So by AD on Azure, what do you mean? Do you have Azure Active Directory, or do you
Yes,
have
yes, yes.
you,
Yeah,
you don't have legacy Active Directory, is it?
yes, yes.
So essentially, so this is something which that's a good question, Raj. So see, you might have observed when you install Windows 10 to start with, first time installation of Windows 10, it asks you, do you have a Microsoft account? Okay, you can enter your Outlook account there. And by default, every time you log in to your Windows 10 machine, you can log into Outlook account. You log in using your Outlook account or Hotmail account or Windows account, Microsoft account. Now, what happens is when you set it up for the first time, your machine joins to the work group or joins to the does a Azure AD join to Outlook or Hotmail, and even your mail profile is configured, which helps you get single sign-on. So essentially, as soon as you're connected to internet, it tries to authenticate you using login.microsoft.com, and you're able to log in. If you're not connected to internet, it is able to help you log in using your cached credentials also. So to answer your question, your users are Azure AD hybrid join, Azure AD join. How will they authenticate when they are working from home? They will do it in a similar fashion. So as soon as they are connected to internet, they will reach out to Azure AD for authentication. If there are certain policies which are pushed by Azure Active Directory using Intune or some other things, those policies will also apply on your machine, similar to how it would be for an on-prem environment. So on-prem environment policies or authentication would only get in when domain controller is in line of sight. So for on-prem, domain controller needs to be in the same network or communicatable over private IP. For Azure Active Directory, it is communicating over the internet. So there's no concept of public IP here, since we are talking about login.microsoft or some other URLs, which is generally available. So there's no specific IP it communicates with. Probably there's a list.
Okay, okay.
Okay, I think we have done with all the questions. If you still have questions, you can reach out to Zoheb. I believe Zoheb, that would be fine, right?
Yes, it's okay.
Yeah.
Zoheb,
And we
your
will
website,
publish.
please.
Sorry.
Your website, Zoheb, please.
You can probably reach out to me on LinkedIn. So it's my LinkedIn is tagged. So Kasam has tagged me. Or alternatively, you could just post comments on the YouTube video, and I'll be happy to answer.
Right. So we will be publishing the video. So you can, if you have any queries, you can just comment it over there, and I will try to reach out Zoheb on that point. So
Zoheb,
yeah.
Zoheb, you have said like ak.ms or something you have given your website, right?
So that's my blog profile, aka.ms/zoebs. That's my blog profile. So that's where I write my blogs. But as I said, specific to this topic, if you have any questions, it's best you comment on the YouTube videos and I'll answer it, or you can reach out to me via LinkedIn.
Sure.
Thanks, Zoheb,
Hello.
thanks, Zoheb, and thanks, Kasam. I just have a quick question.
Hello, Zoheb. I have one question.
Yeah, sorry, one at a time. Who's going
Hello.
first? I can't see the name.
Yeah, Zoheb. Yeah, Zoheb. This is Mustafa here. I have one quick question. My question is, if we have Active Directory, we are logging in, in the Microsoft Azure with a username, and we are syncing the on-prem Active Directory to the cloud. Now,
Right.
what if we do that with another account, Microsoft account? Will it stop us, or will it still allow to sync the other account?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if I understand your question correctly, I have a single domain Active Directory and I want to synchronize it with two tenants. So for example, kasam.com and maybe mustafa.com. So these are the two different domains. Can I synchronize my same on-prem directory with two different domains? You can't. It is not supported. Your seamless SSO breaks. You can do it if you have you can synchronize certain users with X tenant and certain users with Y tenant. All the users can't be synchronized with both the tenants. The user has to be unique because there are some source anchor and other attributes which make it unique. So that needs to be unique for tenants.
So how it will identify that, suppose I have synced all my Active Directory users on Prime to the cloud on one particular account. Now I'm trying to do it through another account. How will it identify that the syncing has already happened or the connection has already?
So that's an unsupported scenario which we are talking about. So there's a source anchor attribute which it picks up. So it might be able to identify it. So see, Mustafa, there are two things here. Something which can work technically and something which is supported. Okay. So this scenario, as far as I know, is not tested by Microsoft. So anything which is not tested is not supported. So if you encounter some issue with that, then it is potentially not supported.
Yeah, because why I'm asking, because if one user has gone through the syncing and suddenly, you with another account, you try to start doing that, so that's why I was trying to see if there is any kind of,
So as I said,
notification from, yeah.
so as I said, so it's not that the synchronization happens one time. It is an ongoing job. If any attribute changes, password changes, if password changes in Azure Active Directory and those kind of things, it will synchronize with vice versa. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you is it will break a lot of things if you do it. Like one of the things it will break is seamless SSO. Auto sign on, it will break because auto sign on creates a computer object in your domain which can be only one per domain or one per forest rather. So if you do it something like that, your auto single sign on will fail, which is your seamless single sign on will fail. Plus, as I said, this is not a supported way of doing it anyways.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, guys, let's end the session because it's almost more than 2 hours now. Thanks a lot, Zoheb, for this very informative session. I believe many things and many myths are cleared with respect to Azure AD. We'll try to have more sessions, if you don't mind, with us, some of like P2B and all kind of topics, which are more revolve around this Azure Active Directory part. So definitely, guys, thank you all of you for joining during the weekend, and don't forget to submit your answer for the quiz. So we publish the video, and then you can have the quiz link in that video description itself, and you will be if you the one lucky winner will get an Microsoft certification voucher. And for the last week sessions results will be out soon. So again, thank you, Zoheb, thank you everyone for joining, and looking forward for the next session. The next session is on next Saturday, that is 17th October, and at the same time 12:30 p.m. IST, and the topic would be Azure Data Fundamentals, that is DP100. So thank you for joining, and have a nice day, have a nice weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kasam. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Zoheb. Thank you, Kasam. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.